They told me working the late shift at McDonald's was boring. It wasn't boring, it was eerie. The way the fluorescent lights flickered at 2 a.m., casting shadows on the greasy floors, felt like something out of a low-budget horror movie. Most nights, I was alone with Tony, the night manager, who spent most of his time in the back office checking inventory, which I'm convinced was code for napping. It started last Wednesday. The night was dead quiet, no customers for almost an hour, so I was wiping down the counters. That's when the door chimed. A man walked in. I could tell immediately something was off. He was tall, too thin, and dressed like he'd stepped out of the 1950s. Dark slacks, suspenders, a white shirt, and a tie that looked stained with something dark. But it wasn't his clothes that made my skin crawl. It was his face, pale, hollow, and his eyes, they looked too big for his skull, like they were straining to burst out. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but layered with something I can only describe as wrong. "I'd like to order." I grabbed my notepad, trying to shake off the unease. "Sure thing. What can I get you?" He didn't look at the menu. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like a bird studying its prey. "Something fresh." I forced a laugh. "Well, we've got burgers, fries, nuggets." "Not that," he interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Something fresher." I stood there, my pen hovering above the notepad, unsure how to respond. Sir," I said, forcing a nervous chuckle, "everything here is fresh. As fresh as McDonald's gets, anyway." He didn't laugh. His expression didn't change. Those oversized eyes stayed locked on me, unblinking. For a second, I thought he might lunge across the counter, but instead, he tilted his head the other way, like he was trying to figure out what I was made of. "I'll wait," he finally said. "For what?" His lips curled into a smile that made my stomach churn. "Something fresher." Then he walked past the counter, through the dining area, and sat at a booth near the far corner. I leaned back to glance toward the office, but Tony was nowhere to be found. Typical. I looked at the guy again. He was just sitting there, staring out the window into the empty parking lot, his hands clasped together like he was praying. Something about the way he sat so still freaked me out. Nobody sits like that. I tried to ignore him and went back to wiping down the counters, but every time I glanced up, I'd catch him watching me out of the corner of his eye. Then things got weirder. The fryer beeped, signaling that someone had dropped fries. But I hadn't, and Tony sure as hell wasn't back there. I froze, staring at the kitchen area, expecting to see something or someone moving around. But the fryers were empty, bubbling away like they had a mind of their own. The man's voice cut through the silence. "It's starting," he said, so quietly I barely heard him. "What's starting?" I asked, but he didn't answer. That's when the lights started to flicker. The flickering lights cast the restaurant in waves of brightness and shadow, making everything feel surreal. I could see the man in the corner, sitting perfectly still, but now his head was turned toward the kitchen. He was watching something I couldn't see. "Tony," I called, my voice shaky. No answer. I stepped toward the kitchen, trying to convince myself it was just a glitch, a fryer malfunction, a power surge, something logical. But as I pushed through the swinging door, I felt the temperature drop. It wasn't just colder, it was like stepping into a freezer. My breath fogged the air, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. "Tony," I called again, louder this time. Still no response. The kitchen was eerily silent, except for the fryer bubbling away, still empty. I walked over to turn it off, but as I reached for the switch, something caught my eye. A shadow, moving across the far wall, just out of sync with the flickering lights. "Tony, if you're messing with me, it's not funny," I shouted, more to comfort myself than anything. The shadow stopped. It didn't fade or flicker, it just froze, as if whatever was casting it was now completely still. My hand trembled as I grabbed a spatula from the counter, the closest thing to a weapon I could find. The shadow moved again, this time toward the walk-in freezer. "Tony," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The freezer door creaked open, just an inch, but enough to let out a puff of icy air. I tightened my grip on the spatula and stepped closer, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the bubbling fryer. I reached for the freezer handle, ready to pull it open, when I heard a low, guttural sound behind me. I spun around, expecting to see Tony, or worse, the man from the corner. But there was nothing, just the empty kitchen, bathed in the erratic glow of the flickering lights. Then I saw it. Something was dripping onto the floor from above. Slowly, deliberately, a dark, thick liquid, pooling near my feet. My eyes followed the trail upward, to the ceiling vents. And that's when I saw it. A pair of eyes, too big for their sockets, stared back at me through the grate. I couldn't move. My legs felt like cement, my lungs forgotten how to breathe. Those eyes, huge, glassy, and impossibly wide, stared down at me, unblinking, like they were studying me. The liquid kept dripping, thick, dark. It splattered onto the metal counter near me, and under the flickering lights, I realized it wasn't oil or water. It was blood. I staggered backward, nearly slipping on the grease-slick floor. The vents groaned, like something heavy was shifting inside. And then it moved. A pale, spindly hand slid out of the vent grate, its fingers unnaturally long, tipped with jagged black nails. It gripped the edge of the vent, followed by another hand, as if something or someone was crawling out. "Nope, nope, nope," I whispered, shaking my head like I could erase the scene from existence. I turned and bolted for the door, but as I pushed through the swinging panel, I heard a deep, bone-rattling hiss from behind me. I didn't dare look back. The dining area was empty, except for the man in the corner. He hadn't moved an inch. His hands were still clasped together, his head tilted slightly to the side. But now his eyes were on me. "What's in the vents?" I shouted at him, my voice cracking. His expression didn't change, but he finally spoke. "You left it open. What the hell are you talking about?" I yelled. He smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of his lips that made my skin crawl. "It's hungry." Behind me, the kitchen door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. I jumped, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I turned back to the man, he was gone. The booth where he'd been sitting was empty, but the bloodied imprint of his hands stained the table. And then I heard it again, the groaning metal, but this time, it wasn't coming from the kitchen. It was above me. I tilted my head up, praying I wouldn't see what I knew was already there. The ceiling tiles bulged downward, like something heavy was crawling just above them. A low, scraping sound followed, like nails dragging across metal. The lights flickered violently, plunging the dining room into bursts of darkness. Each time the lights came back on, the bulge in the ceiling was closer. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a metal tray, and held it in front of me like a shield. The ceiling tile directly above me buckled, and then it collapsed. When the ceiling tile crashed to the floor, I staggered backward, barely keeping my balance. Dust and bits of insulation rained down, but I wasn't looking at the debris. I was looking at it. It was crouched on the exposed beams, its pale, skeletal frame illuminated by the flickering lights. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its mouth stretched far too wide, filled with jagged, uneven teeth. Those massive, unblinking eyes fixed on me, glinting with hunger. It let out a low, guttural hiss, its chest expanding like it was inhaling the room itself. I could see its ribs, thin and sharp, pressing against its translucent skin. I tried to move, but my body betrayed me, frozen in pure terror. It shifted, creeping down the beam with a jerking, spider-like motion. The sound of its claws scraping against the metal sent shivers down my spine. "Tony!" I screamed, my voice cracking, but deep down I knew he wasn't coming. The thing dropped from the ceiling without warning, landing on the floor with a sickening crack that echoed through the empty restaurant. It stood, taller than any human should be, its limbs grotesquely elongated, its head nearly scraping the ceiling. Cocked its head, studying me. Then it smiled. Not like the creepy man in the corner. This smile was wrong. It stretched impossibly wide, splitting its face nearly in two, revealing rows of serrated teeth glistening with saliva. I bolted for the front door. My shoes squeaked against the floor as I ran, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the creature's guttural growl. I didn't dare look back, but the door wouldn't budge. I slammed into it with all my weight, but it was locked. My trembling fingers fumbled with the latch, but it wouldn't turn. Panic clawed at my throat as I heard the scraping sound of claws against the tile, growing louder, closer. I spun around, pressing my back to the door, clutching the metal tray like it could actually protect me. The creature was there, crouched low, its head tilted at that unnatural angle again. Its claws tapped against the floor, slow and deliberate, like it was toying with me. "I don't want to die," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The creature lunged. I swung the tray with all my strength, catching it across the face. The impact barely fazed it, but it bought me a second to dive behind the counter. My hands fumbled for anything. Something sharp, something heavy, something that could stop this thing. They landed on the fryer basket. Desperation took over. I turned toward the creature, now towering over the counter, its claws reaching for me. With a scream, I swung the basket, knocking it backward into the fryer. The boiling oil splashed onto its face, and the creature let out an unearthly screech, thrashing wildly as the smell of burning flesh filled the air. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I scrambled over the counter, slipped on the blood-slick floor, and sprinted for the emergency exit in the back. This door, thank God, wasn't locked. I burst into the cold night air, my legs barely holding me up as I ran across the empty parking lot. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street, my lungs burning and my hands trembling. When I finally dared to look back, the McDonald's was dark. The flickering lights had stopped, and the restaurant looked completely still, like nothing had happened at all. Except for the man. He was standing in the parking lot, under the pale glow of a street lamp. He looked at me, smiled that same unsettling smile, and gave a slow, deliberate wave. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I quit the next morning. I didn't bother explaining why. I just handed in my badge and walked out. But every now and then, late at night, I think about those eyes. And I wonder, was it still in there, waiting? Quitting felt like the right thing to do, but the nightmares started almost immediately. Every night, I saw the creature's eyes, the impossible smile, and the man under the street lamp, his wave hauntingly slow, like he was telling me we'd meet again. A week after I left McDonald's, I swore I'd moved on. I avoided that location entirely. I told myself it was all in my head, maybe some elaborate prank cooked up by Tony, if he was even alive. But deep down, I knew the truth. Then I got the call. It was 11 p.m. I was sitting on my couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, trying to drown out the unease that seemed to follow me everywhere. My phone buzzed, and I frowned. The screen lit up with unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." There was silence at first. Then, a low, wet gurgling sound came through the line, followed by a faint tapping, like claws on tile. My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. A deep, guttural voice rasped. "You left it open." I froze. "What?" The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. My first instinct was to block the number, to tell myself it was some sick joke. But something in my gut told me it wasn't over. The next day, I couldn't resist. I drove by the McDonald's on my way home from running errands. I didn't stop. I just wanted to see if everything looked normal. Didn't. The restaurant was closed. Not just for the night, permanently. The windows were boarded up, and a bright yellow sign was posted on the door. Closed for renovations. I didn't buy it. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about what I'd seen, about the man, the creature, and that thing in the vents. But as time passed, the nightmares faded, and I convinced myself it was over. Until the news report. It was a quiet Thursday evening, and I was flipping through channels when a breaking news banner caught my attention. The anchor looked pale, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with unease. "We have a disturbing story tonight out of New Haven," he began, his voice shaky. "Authorities are investigating reports of multiple disappearances linked to a now-closed fast food location. Witnesses claim to have seen strange activity near the building late at night." My stomach churned as they cut to footage of the McDonald's parking lot. Yellow police tape surrounded the building, and in the background, officers were carrying something out on a stretcher. The camera was too far away to see what it was, but the shape under the sheet was wrong. Too long, too thin. "Officials have not released further details at this time," the anchor continued, "but witnesses described strange sounds coming from the building in the early hours of the morning, including what some have reported as growling." The screen flashed to an interview with a local man, his face blurred. "I saw something in there," he said, his voice shaking. "Big, pale, looked right at me through the window. It ain't human, I'll tell you that much." I turned off the TV and sat in silence, my pulse thundering in my ears. I don't know what they found in that building. I don't know if they managed to get rid of it. But last night, I woke up to a sound outside my apartment. A low, guttural hiss. When I looked out my window, there was nothing there. But on my doorstep this morning, a McDonald's fryer basket. And now I'm leaving this story here for you. If you ever find yourself working the late shift, remember this. Some doors should stay closed. Some things should be left in the dark. And if you hear something moving in the vents, run. I tried to tell myself the fryer basket was a coincidence, that it wasn't a message. But deep down, I knew better. The moment I saw it sitting there, I felt the same bone-deep chill I'd felt that night in the restaurant. I didn't touch it. I left it there on the doorstep like ignoring it might make it go away. But as the hours ticked by, paranoia settled in. Every creak of my apartment building, every flicker of the lights, every shadow out of the corner of my eye, it all felt wrong. That night, I barely slept. I kept the lights on, the TV blaring, and a knife by my bed, even though I knew it wouldn't help if it came for me. At 3:33 a.m., I woke up to the sound of scratching at my front door. It wasn't loud, just faint enough to make me doubt my ears. But it was there, slow and deliberate, like something testing the threshold. My heart pounded as I grabbed the knife and crept toward the door, every step feeling like it might be my last. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear. Nothing. But when I looked down, I saw a shadow moving under the door. Long, thin, clawed fingers reaching out, trying to find a way in. I stumbled back, choking on my own breath. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and then it stopped. Silence. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. Finally, I worked up the courage to peek through the peephole. The hallway was empty, or so I thought. I started to turn away, but something made me look again, and that's when I saw it. Far down the hall, just past the edge of the dim light, something moved. It wasn't walking, it was crawling. Pale, spindly limbs pulled its twisted frame closer to me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I didn't wait. I slammed every lock on the door, shoved the couch in front of it, and ran to my bedroom. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, it was morning. The apartment was eerily quiet, and for a second, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. But when I went to the door, I froze. Carved into the wood, deep and deliberate, was a single word. Open. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it's still after me. But I do know this. It's not over. It never will be. If you ever find yourself working the late shift at a McDonald's, or anywhere, really, and you hear something in the vents, don't investigate. And for the love of God, never leave the door open. Because once you do, it won't stop until it finds you.